Breaking news out of El Salvador. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is speaking to reporters there, and he says he is now the acting director of USAID.
I'm the acting director of USAID. I've delegated that authority to someone, but I stay in touch with him. And again, our goal was to go in and align our foreign aid to the national interest. But if you go to mission after mission and embassy after embassy around the world, you will often find that in many cases, USAID is involved in programs that run counter to what we're trying to do in our national strategy with that country or with that region. That cannot continue. USAID is not.
To help us make sense of this and everything else we've talked about so far is our very own Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS and author of Age of Revolutions, Progress and Backlash from 1600 to the present. You're going to have to update that book pretty soon, Fareed. Let's start with the news out of El Salvador and what the Secretary of State said. And if you can just explain, if I'm tuning in and I hear USAID and DOGE and this sort of alphabet soup of federal agencies, particularly on this decision to move USAID underneath the Secretary of State, why does that matter? Why is this significant?
Well, I think what is going on is that Donald Trump is launching a kind of frontal attack on what he calls the deep state, the administrative state. And what they're trying to do, which is very interesting, is to do it with as little congressional involvement as possible. Most of this stuff could be done. Congress can rewrite the laws. They can make USAID part of the State Department. It used to be part of the State Department once. They can take it out. They could take the Consumer Protection Bureau out or in of inside Treasury. But what Trump is doing here is using executive authority. So he is essentially appointing Marco Rubio, the director of USAID, because usually the legislation has a clause which says, if you don't have somebody, you can have an acting director who is already Senate confirmed. Mm-hmm. They've done the same thing with Scott Bessent. So the idea is basically to do an end run around Congress. And the fascinating thing is Congress is just rolling over. Congress is refusing to assert its institutional prerogative as a check on executive authority.
It's remarkable. I mean, I covered Congress on and off for 20 years. I have never heard a sound of silence so deafening from those people who, on both, well, let's be honest, mostly Republicans who are aligned with Donald Trump and who have the same voters as Donald Trump and need them to get reelected. Just sticking with USAID and the mission of that organization, you just heard Rubio say that part of the reason that they want it underneath the State Department is because they don't believe that some of what USAID does is aligned with what Donald Trump and his philosophy globally. Can you explain that, parse that?
It's a little hard to because there were no specifics in it. Look, I'm perfectly willing to believe that there's fraud and waste and mismanagement at USAID. It's quite possible. The federal government is not the world's most efficient place. But as far as we can tell, this is all being done without any specifics. It's largely being done by Elon Musk. I don't know how deeply he has gotten involved in the issue. And one does know that there are a lot of ongoing programs that do seem to be very good. The USAID funds schools for girls in Afghanistan, and frankly, schools for girls in lots of places in the world where there is deep, deep anti-female education culture and even laws. USAID provides things like life-saving drugs to people in Africa. And, the prospect of the richest country in the history of the world denying life-saving medicines to literally the poorest people in the world because there is concerns about corruption just seems to me there's got to be a better way to do this. I mean, you could certainly review every one of these programs, but do you really have to shut down so many of these programs? You have to, the chaos seems performative. It's a desire to show, to own the libs in some way or the other.
That's really interesting. I want to even go up a few more thousand feet in our discussion. And I was thinking about asking you about what we're seeing right now in the following way. Imagine if you were looking at a democratically elected leader in another country doing what Donald Trump has done in the first 2 weeks of his administration. You can add Elon Musk into that equation, a billionaire, the richest person in the world, who spent more than $200 million to help get said Democratic leader elected. What would be the take on that if we could just take ourselves out of the U.S.?
Well, the Musk thing is completely unprecedented, as far as I know, in any place, anywhere. If you look at it, step back, the radicalness of Trump's policies is actually not so unusual. Look, in a legislative parliamentary democracy, you have governments come in, like Margaret Thatcher's government came in and completely change all public policy. You have Labour governments come in and they can completely, change all public policy. What's unusual here is, to begin with, there was an enormous amount of performance. So, ending birthright citizenship. Even the immigration moves are actually not that dramatic. I mean, I would be very surprised if Donald Trump will get up to Barack Obama's levels of deportation this year. Barack Obama deported 3.5 million people, right? So a lot of this is performance, but it's performance aimed at rewarding your allies, undermining the rule of law, the January 6th pardons. So that's the part that's unusual. There is an enormous amount of performative moves to say we're in charge and we're going to break this whole federal government apart.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And so much of the performance, I mean, let's just take what we're seeing right now with the Mexican tariffs, which we didn't get into, and I'm sorry about that, please come back. Just the threat allowed for a conversation that at least delayed that for a month. Who knows what's going to happen by the day's end with Canada?
Right, and you could have had a conversation with the Mexicans easily without the threat. The idea that the Mexicans have not been willing to talk about fentanyl is absurd. And with the Canadians, I mean, Canada represents less than 0.5% of all the fentanyl that comes into the United States. Canada represents 5% of all the undocumented migrants that come into the United States. So the argument for the tariffs on Canada are frankly totally bizarre. But again, it's the performance. Yeah. This is all, if you think about it, it's all about signaling that there's a big bad sheriff in town. And then when you scratch beneath the surface, I'm not sure you're seeing as much there, other than, as I say, the erosion of congressional power and the erosion of the rule of law with things like the January 6th pardons. Those are probably the most dramatic legacies of what Trump has done.
So far. Fareed, please come back. So great to talk to you. You always make us all smarter. Appreciate it.